You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi.
For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas. I'm Fatima, CEO at Agile Management Office, Mental Health Ambassador, and your host. On today's podcast, we have the lovely lady, Josephine Palermo. Josephine has helped hundreds of business leaders to develop high-performing teams and strong cultures to achieve bigger dreams in their businesses. Together, she finds untapped potential in people and systems, freeing up resources that can be used to help businesses grow and thrive. The results are more time for business owners and managers, more value to customers, and more engaged staff. Josephine believes that we should demand more from our business culture by shaping it purposefully through signature experiences for our customers and employees. A PhD in organizational psychology and numerous publications in areas around organizational development, action research, and change coaching and leadership informs her practice. She's held numerous leadership roles, both in public and private sector organizations, and as an academic and researcher. Recently, while working for Australia's largest telecommunications provider, leading strategic change and customer experience, she led a $5 million program building leading-edge technological capability that put network performance visibility in the hands of large enterprise customers. Her new book, Rising to Feminine Power, The Lasso of Truth, was just recently launched. And in 2020, she launched a podcast called Gears Action Growth, where she discusses topics related to business culture and teams with special guests. So please join me in welcoming Josephine to the podcast. Josephine, welcome to the show.
Hi, Fatima. Great to be here.
Thanks so much. We were just saying earlier that we've known each other for a while. It's been a while since we caught up, but you've been a busy lady. So
yes,
that's been definitely been observed from all the things you're doing. I've just given a bit of a background to yourself, but I'd love it in your own words if you can just maybe give a couple of minutes introduction to who you are and I guess what brings you here today after all the things you've been doing in your career.
Yeah, sure. I think I've done various things. I think what ties together all the things that I've done and still are doing is my passion to really create workplaces that are really fit for human beings. So workplaces where people can flourish, because that's going to be really good for business as well. And so I've got a background in psychology. I've got a PhD in organizational psychology, and I've been really researching, thinking, and applying ideas about how we can make work life better for the majority of people, but also, for me, it does start with leaders and what leaders are doing very often.
Amazing. And, one of the common sort of comments that I hear a lot about is people referring to work life and then using the word balance. Do you believe in work-life balance? Why or why not?
I believe in bringing our whole selves to work. And so the balance is, it's a little bit 1980s, because that's sort of, I think we've come a long way in really acknowledging that people are whole human beings. And so you've got to deal with people in that way. So we don't just, compartmentalize work and then switch off work when we're not at work. It's part of a way in which we make meaning in our life, and particularly if we're purpose driven. And more today, people are looking for workplaces and organizations that are very purpose driven and aligned with their own values. So the balance, I think that there is still some, I think that's still appropriate for us to think about. Are we living the life that we want? Is it balanced in the way that we have time for the things we really care about? I think but it's not just work and life. If I was to think of my own life, in that mix is my health, my well-being, my family. Do I have time to be creative and passionate about the things that I care about? Am I paying it forward? Am I, it's all of those things, as well as what I'm achieving on a daily basis at work as well. So I think when we think about people in systems, I always think at the systems level, it's much more than work and whatever we do when we're not at work.
I like that, because I think when we think about it, you're right, there's so many other factors. It's not, if we're balancing things, it's not just work and life. And I think
Yeah.
you need to think about it at, day, your week, your months, like what does that look like holistically, as opposed to
Exactly.
putting it in a compartmentalized box. So
That's right. Yeah.
I just thought, that would be interesting, because there's so many discussions about it, and you hear a lot about it, especially when it
Yeah.
comes to women as well. And I'm kind of, seeing that there is definitely a lot of, it's just got a message earlier this week about women in project management, for example, and women in this and women in that. What sort of are you seeing in that space, in particular to women? Is there anything you're seeing in your research, or
Yeah.
that you specifically see that is different for women?
Yeah. I look, the thing about gender, and I like to look at gender from a psychological perspective. So it's not just, when I look at gender, I don't just look at the differences between men and women and, everyone else in between. It's how we can express femininity and masculinity in the workplace. So we at the moment, we do have a model for leadership and a model for a business that's quite masculine. It overvalues those attributes that are masculine, and because of the way we're socialized, men tend to be socialized into those masculine attributes, and women tend to be socialized into those feminine attributes. And what plays out there is differences because of that. So when we look at the research, we see that men and women are equally capable. They are, equally going through, for example, education. They've got equal qualifications. But we still have a gender pay gap in Australia, for example. It's something like around 18%. It differs state to state, but it's still a quite a significant gender pay gap. And that's really because we are overvaluing masculinity and undervaluing femininity. And that kind of translates. So there are issues that women face because they're confronted with a system that's disadvantaging them. I'll give you an example. So we talk about collaboration a lot, particularly in project management, when you're dealing with complexity, when you're dealing with ambiguity. If you're not optimizing collaboration, you're never going to solve problems that you need to solve, and you're never going to do things, in a more streamlined and you're never going to get to speed and the quality that you want. Now, when we look at psychological gender, collaboration is in the realm of femininity, because femininity is the ability to connect, to understand the relationships around you, to use those relationships well, to consider others, to think about a system as being, really made of relationships. Yet what we have is many men operating in a masculine way, and in some ways forcing the women to operate in a masculine way, where we focus on perhaps competition over cooperation, or we reward individual effort over team or collective effort. So the system itself is geared towards that way of thinking, and so that does play out in what women and men experience. When I did my PhD a long time ago now, my question was, what's the kind of environment that do we need in work where women can really thrive and flourish? And what I found was that women and men equally were very comfortable in that masculine environment, but it was the feminine attributes that women didn't see that were really causing them a bit of distress and anxiety. And actually, they were leaving workplaces because they just didn't see that reflected back at them. And that's why you have, for example, sometimes you have you can have an organization where all the leaders or the senior leaders tend to be male. It's because they're going through the ranks and they're perhaps being attracted to those masculine attributes, or those masculine attributes are being attributed to them, and the women are either not being recognized, or they're actually looking up and not seeing people they can relate to and thinking, I can't do that job. That, there's no one like me, when I look up the hierarchy. And so that's where those differences play out. So you've got to kind of go beyond thinking out about it as just men and women. It's the system that we work in. It is biased. It still is biased. Yeah.
It's really interesting you say that, because, growing up as a female in that environment, again, to your point, looking up the line. And I think maybe for some of us, I feel like I was a little bit different. There was definitely intimidation in some of those environments, with big male voices, and even as a small business, and you probably may experience this as well. We're competing with, your big male dominated consultancies and whatnot.
That's right.
I feel like from what my experience of it is, that there are some instances where we ourselves as women and men can change, but to your point, it's actually more of a system change that needs to happen. So what can organizations do to change the system?
Yeah. I think that firstly, I'm a real believer in quotas. I really believe in quotas. And when I was a general manager at Telstra, driving strategic change and enablement there, and I was part of the team that was driving quotas in our business, because we were, technology, male dominated environment. Many of the team leader positions and leadership positions were male dominated. And so we actually gave managers quotas. And what we did is we said, when there's a new position, you must shortlist women. And so many managers would come back to me and say, but, women don't apply for these jobs, or I don't have enough good women who I can select from. And the way to think about that differently is out of the CVs that come your way, or perhaps, they're using recruiters. So if you say to your recruiter, you must give me some CVs from women, they will work harder to, for example, find women who are more likely to apply, because sometimes women need a bit of a tap on the shoulder because they might not be thinking in that way, or they because they haven't practiced that particular role, they might be underestimating their abilities. And we know from the research, women underplay their abilities. Mm-hmm. Men tend to overestimate their abilities. Mm-hmm. And so there's that. And then secondly, sometimes on paper, women don't look as good as the men do, because the men have had more opportunities to have practice at those particular roles. And but it might be that you put a woman in that role and she's equally capable to do the job. So what you've got to level the playing field, because right now we're actually missing out on talent because of that blind spot. So it's about just giving the opportunity to widen your pool a little bit so you can bring more people into the organization. When you have more people of a particular mindset in an organization, it's going to change the system. And then of course you've got to go to, what are your norms? What are the team routines that help you unlock some of those biases? So for example, teams get into habits of doing things a particular way, leaders get into habits of doing things a particular way, and just having an opportunity to say, what if we did this differently? Or what if what's another way of doing this? And it's opening up those discussions. And when you have people in the room who perhaps come from different life experiences, you're going to have better ideas.
Absolutely. And I think, look, quotas, have made their appearance more frequently in the last few years. I've definitely seen it at, some of the banks working with them. Yeah. I think to your point, one thing you pointed out that's really important is actually broadening the pool, because if we don't, then people will use quotas in the wrong way, and they'll just put women in front of, the interviewers just for the sake of ticking the box. So we hope that doesn't happen. We don't want that.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Thinking about, the teams that you have worked with where you've seen high performance, what examples can you share about how to get teams to be high performance, and factor in the culture element as well?
Yeah. So we often think of people, a group of people, and we often immediately go to what kind of people are they? So personality, what skills do they have? Now, those things are somewhat important, but actually what makes a huge difference to whether people have an environment where they can truly collaborate is there's 6 things that you need a team to be doing. The first thing is, do you have a team that's small enough to collaborate? Sometimes we have teams that are too big. Project management is really, one of those areas. If your team is too big, then they're never going to get to that really nice humming, level of collaboration, or you'll have you'll have subgroups that splinter off. So do you really have the right people there? That's the first thing. The second thing is, does everybody really understand the vision? And are they on the same page with purpose? Is there clarity? And slowing down the conversation, especially at the start when you launch a project, slowing that down and making sure you have shared understanding of purpose and vision is really important. And then also repeating that often. So maybe every 3 months or every 6 months, because people, they have good intentions, but they stray off the path. Mm-hmm. What did we intend to do? And sometimes the purpose does shift and change as long as everyone agrees. The worst thing is when you have one person, like one functional head, saying, well, that's my purpose, and another functional head saying, yes, but I have this purpose for this particular thing. And you have, then you have, disagreement and conflict. So purpose and particularly that ability to sort of really align on vision. And then the rest of it is, do you have people with enough diversity so that you've got lots of different ideas there? And then the fourth factor is, do you have rituals and team routines that keep the team learning? Because often I think we put in, like, we might have meetings, we might have stand-ups, but are those things really helping the team learn? Or are we just coming together and giving each other updates and nobody's keeping each other accountable? It's just we're just sharing information we could read on a SharePoint drive, Mm-hmm. What are we doing when we come together? The fifth thing is, does the team have the right sponsorship? That's super important, because if the team doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the information flow, I often get people saying, oh, but it's, we're trying to do this work, but it's the other department or the other team, they're not giving me information, or I'm not in the loop. That's the team leader's responsibility to promote what the team does, so that then that other team goes, hey, Fatima's team, I know what they do. They need to know this thing. I know that I am really succeeding in a particular organization when information comes to me. Mm-hmm. A lot of people get so anxious. Yes. They don't know about getting all the information and having control. It's not about that. You know that you will succeed if people know to come to you and tell you things, or keep you in the loop on things. Yes. It's not even about chasing stuff. And then the last thing is, do you have the team members coaching each other? Do team members come to a meeting and they go with the flow, but they don't really pull each other up on things, or they'll let each other fail. They don't have each other's back. When you think about the best teams you've worked in is when maybe the shit has hit the fan and people have come together and they have each other's back. That really creates psychological safety too, because you can fail, and your team leaders, or your team leader and your team members, your colleagues, your peers will kind of lean in and solve the problem with you. Mm-hmm. Rather than what often happens is that you fail or something goes wrong and people are looking for who to blame. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We are all successful together. If one person doesn't succeed, it means we all don't succeed. So having that really clear sense of we're in this together, and it's important that we have a vested interest, because then suddenly the conversation changes, and people care more to give each other feedback. Yeah. I remember a really good lesson I learned was watching one of my executives that I was reporting to. She'd gone to an executive meeting, and it was the end of the day, and I heard her on the phone, and she was the only woman actually in this executive group. And I heard her on the phone, and she had called one of the other executives, and she was talking about what had happened in the meeting. And she was basically, I didn't hear what he was saying, but I could hear her saying, yeah, but that wasn't really you showing up in your best self, was it? I see, I can understand, but she was coaching him, because she was saying, that could have gone another way, and so in a really gentle, compassionate way, she was saying, I care about your success. I'm not going to let this go. I saw something happen and I'm going to talk to you about it.
And that's what a good coach
really
does.
Good lesson. Sorry?
100%. That's what a good coach does.
Exactly.
It's finding those opportunities for those micro lessons, and it's not about telling you, it's helping you to get to that conclusion. So
Exactly. And we're all part, if we're part of a team, we all have that coaching responsibility.
yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah, I think those 6 points that you made are really good. And, you know, when you look at them, you see them and you think it's obvious, you know,
Yeah,
what is your team, but it doesn't. And it's often, I don't know if it's sometimes an ego thing, or maybe there's differences between private and public sectors, which I'm kind of keen to talk about. But one of the things I was thinking about the other day, I was thinking about how, at least in some, particularly in government, I find the hierarchies are being used to hide, which is something I was thinking about. What would be some of the sort of telltale signs of a bad culture? Because one of them I have seen quite a lot recently is high turnover.
Yes. Yeah.
And managers try to make excuses for it as if it's something else. And I wonder why they don't pay attention to the culture. So what would be some other red flags for?
Yeah, well, that's definitely a red flag. The other one is that when you have a culture that is too nice, where people are just too courteous, or nobody's able to raise conflict in a skillful way, because raising conflict or dealing with conflict actually requires skill, and we often don't learn how to do that. We're often, we're not taught that. And so, if you have a culture where things seem to be okay on the surface, but bubbling underneath, there's a lot going on. That tells you that people aren't raising conflict in the right channels. And the other thing is where you have fractured subgroups. So where you have, small groups of people going off, and because the thing about what happens in organizations is we create reality from the inside out. So we create stories in our head, and so often what you have is you have maybe small groups of people splintering off, and they're just talking about the story from their perspective. They're not even fact checking really anything, and they're creating judgments. Then they're coming back to maybe the larger group, and there's this weird dynamic, and nobody really knows why. It's because we've all got these stories going on in our heads, all with our own assumptions and beliefs. And so when you see cliquey subgroups occurring, that's a really, telltale sign. And that'll happen, for example, when you have, say you've got steering group. And I saw your post the other day on steering groups are ineffectual. I totally agree. Yeah, I loved that. I saw that. Thank you, Fatima. I love that. But steering groups, for example, come together. Yes. They don't actually do any work in the meeting, and then maybe you see these sort of fractured groups out, and the work gets done outside. That is culturally ineffective, and it's a telltale sign that something's not going right in terms of people aren't able to deal with the issue in the room. They're not able to deal, and they're probably not understanding the role they play on that group.
Yes. And I think a big part of that comes down to as well fear. People fearful to speak up, and we work with some clients where you can't get a decision on anything because they have to check with another person because they're fearful that the manager's going to, that's just that micromanagement. It just blows my mind how people do that still.
And we still, this is the thing, we have an idealized version of workplaces. Most workplaces actually are still command and control. I've worked with some teams who, go beyond that, and they're doing a really good job. But there is hierarchy in organizations. You can have a really good culture and still have a hierarchy, as long as everybody's clear about their role and how decisions are made, and there's transparency. But particularly in perhaps the public sector, but I see this in the private sector too, particularly small to medium organizations. Lots of command and control where CEOs can't let go and they micromanage everything. And, and this is organizations that might have 1,000, 2,000 employees, but the CEO is still controlling everything. So it's much more common than we think. And it's because, and that's where I'm kind of going back to what I was saying earlier. That's what I mean by we have overvalued masculinity, because masculinity focuses on dominance and control. So there's a belief being played out by those leaders that I have to control everything to succeed. if I don't control everything, there's chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, what's happening, there's chaos anyway.
Yes.
But you're just seeing the slice that you're controlling. You know, you're causing the chaos. But this is the thing. So we have to break out of I mean, we know, all the research tells us too, if you delegate decisions down to where the work is done, you get a much better outcome. But that requires high levels of trust, and it requires really clear role delegation, so everybody's clear about what they can make a decision about, what they need to get advice on. What happens and I've worked in these organizations too, where you have this top-down culture. People are so scared to make a mistake that they don't even make decisions around the areas they have delegation for, because they're so scared that they don't need to get the approval. They want to get the approval because then it's not their fault if something goes wrong. Right? It's really, you have to be, you know, in some ways, there's a bravery and a confidence that's required when making decisions. And, but you can do that if you know that you're one up, then the one up above them. If everyone has each other's back in an organization and everybody's being kind of really real with each other and in the moment, you can do that. You can do that because you're course correcting as you go. I'd much rather get feedback as I go than in 6 months' time when someone says to me, 6 months ago you did this. Like, I don't even remember that, you know. And it's not helping me learn. So that learning organization is, you know, that culture of learning is really important.
And you know, think about that example of 6 months. I don't understand why performance reviews are annually and you're not giving anyone an opportunity to improve. If you don't get the feedback, how can you possibly
earlier? That's right.
Yeah, that's definitely got to change as well.
Exactly. And, you know, I think some organizations are doing the right thing and doing them more often. And the best organizations are doing structured, you know, performance review, but daily coaching, daily feedback, in the moment feedback.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's about investing in leaders. I see, you know, you would think that in 2023 we would be investing in leaders a lot more than we are. I don't see that happening. As the economy becomes more, you know, more uncertain, and we're kind of tightening the belt on things because cost of living is going up, cost of distribution and you know, everything's going up. So what organizations are doing is tightening their costs around some of those things, but actually investing in your leaders is the best thing you can do, because they're the ones that are going to drive those, you know, those benefits down the road. But we don't do that. We don't invest enough.
It's a really good segue to a question I was going to ask you about the work that you do. And I think if, you know, from what you mentioned in sort of your bio that you said earlier, one of the things you talk about is freeing up resources and finding untapped potential in business.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah. So untapped potential for me is in two ways. There's untapped potential in collaboration. So when you have end-to-end collaboration, so in other words, you have an end-to-end value chain and everyone's collaborating along the way, you have untapped resources there, because suddenly you can do more, your quality increases, your speed increases. So you know, I remember working with a product team. So we had network engineers on one end and we had sales on the other end, but they weren't talking to each other. So we brought them together and we increased the collaboration, and their speed went up about 3 times. Their sort of ability to develop solutions at speed was increased 3-fold just by increasing the collaboration. So there's untapped potential in that. We have a lot of focus on vertical structures in organizations, and you know, because it kind of goes with that leadership hierarchy. You've got functional heads and they look after their slice, but there's a lot to be said for bringing horizontal slices together. So there's that. And then the second part where you can really unlock potential is in people and capabilities. So we know that, you know, 85% of the jobs being done today probably won't exist in 10 years. You can already see that with the leaps we've made recently in AI. You know, suddenly there's sort of some roles that we know are going to be made redundant very quickly because of that. And but that future's uncertain. We don't really know because of the exponential growth in that sort of technological advancement. But the thing we do know is what kind of future skills we need. So we do know that from a capability perspective, you need people that know how to collaborate. They're agile. They have high adaptive mindsets, so they can adapt and shift quickly. High empathy. I could be describing femininity here, by the way. High empathy and compassion that goes with that. And they particularly have an achievement orientation, but they know how to do that in a collective way. They know how to bring people together. And so none of that is about the skills, the things I know today. It's all about the way I do things, the way my mind thinks about problems, and the how I approach problems. Am I resilient? Am I adaptive? When I see uncertainty, do I buckle under the pressure of that, or do I bring people together and get solutions happening? That's a capability. So if we can measure today what we do is, and we reward people today on what they do today. Mm-hmm. So it's a skills-based approach. But if we were to shift that and actually recognize people for capability, in other words, I can measure your adaptive mindset. I can measure your agility capability. I can do that today. That tells me your potential for the future.
Absolutely.
It's got nothing to do with what you know, by the way. It does nothing to do with your educational qualifications, what you know today. Probably even nothing to do with, it's got a little bit to do with your experience, but not from a specialist perspective. These are more kind of broader sets of abilities that come from partly your disposition. So yes, what kind of personality you have, partly your disposition, partly your skills, but in a big way, your mindset. Those three things together form capability. We can measure that.
Amazing.
So there's potential there, because we can, if I'm recruiting someone and I'm looking for the person with the best adaptive mindset rather than the person who knows how to do, this particular skill, I'm going to be better off, because the person with the adaptive mindset is going to pivot and change as the world pivots and changes around them.
100%. Do you think that, we spend a lot of time in agile environments and agile teams, and one of the things I often talk about is the fixed versus growth mindset.
Yes.
Do you think that everyone, even those that are very fixed mindset, can move to a growth mindset?
Yes, they absolutely can. Yeah. That's a great question too. I mean, and we need people with different mindsets. That's the thing. Diversity is key, right? So, but yes, you can shift, because there are certain exercises you can get people to do. So even someone, because those mindsets are default mindsets, but everyone has an ability to reason. And these are the things that you come together and you do, and they emerge through dialogue, through getting people together and talking about these things. So for example, you might have, I was working with a sales team recently, and they were feeling the burden of all the increased costs around distribution, the blockages in supply, which were really impacting on their ability to kind of get their sales targets that they need. And salespeople are so focused on sales targets, right? And so some of those people were hitting those major challenges, and it was overwhelming, and they were kind of paralyzed by it, because we all have this sort of fight or flight response, right? So they were like a deer in headlights around that. But if you've got more of a growth mindset or more of an adaptive mindset, what you do is you see those challenges and you think, okay, I don't have the answer to that yet. And so even someone who has a really fixed mindset, you bring them into an exercise where you go, let's kind of brainstorm this. And no dumb ideas here. Let's bring out some really dumb ideas, and, they're all part of the mix. You encourage people to think right? To use the lovely higher order cognitive part of our brain that we have. You encourage people to think, and then you can collectively get to a solution. So, default dispositions, personality is formed really early in life. So you're on a hiding to nothing trying to change an individual. But all of those individuals, when you create a really lovely mix of people, you can create a team that's adaptive. You can create a team that has that growth mindset culture. And then that person with the fixed mindset is gonna kind of feel the social contagion of that. They're going to go along with that and they'll learn from that, So because going from one mindset to the other is all about learning.
Absolutely. 100%. And it's interesting. The reason I asked that as well is because as a lot of organizations have been moving to new ways of working, they've set up processes and systems and frameworks around growth mindsets.
Yes.
But I don't think they've necessarily catered for those that are in the fixed mindset. And
exactly.
Some people born like that, and they can be changed. I'm glad you said that, because I definitely have seen a few people who've evolved, but most people are fearful of the unknown. That's why they're scared of change. So I guess you've got to help bring them on that journey.
That's right. You've got to do that. And again, it's part of what you do. I think in organizations, and this is why I'm so focused on groups and teams. So my background in psychology is I studied social psychology. I've always been fascinated with what people do when they come together. Now more than ever, that is so critical. And I think Agile as a methodology is based on a lot of the principles in social psychology. It's kind of based on really harnessing some of the things we know in social psychology, but you can't put those routines in place without then also skilling up people to come together and do things differently when they come together, and to bring others along with them. So there's a people level skill that around ways of working. Otherwise, what you get and what we see is you get people applying some of those methodologies in a way that is distorted.
Yes,
it doesn't really work. And then they say Agile doesn't work. Yeah, and we'll throw it out.
100%. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, nowadays there's over 50 different methods that are based on Agile principles and values. Right. But thinking about that exact point, a lot of the time it's not working because they haven't actually thought about the whole ecosystem of changing not only the ways of working but the ways of thinking.
Yeah, well. Exactly. And it's a lot of the time. People just don't have the skill set to talk to each other in a real way and to deal with real issues. And so there's a skill set, there's an uplift that we need there, because Agile, it's...
Some are introverts and some are extroverts. So
exactly,
you've got to figure out how to cater for all the different personality traits. And like you said, we're all different. So
exactly. And I think particularly some of those Agile rituals and bringing an Agile methodologies really require a level of candor and honesty in a way, integrity, psychological safety, and you need to give people skills around how to build that in their teams and organizations.
100%. And just going back to, the untapped potential, I think that companies could save a lot of money by fixing their processes and reinvesting that in their people, which obviously...
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Listen, Josephine, earlier we mentioned femininity, and I want to talk about your book. So Rising to Feminine Power, The Lasso of Truth. Where did the idea come from for the book? How long did it take to get there? What's it about?
Yeah, so I first started to study gendered psychology when I was doing my PhD. So that was nearly 20 years ago. So I've been thinking about these things a long time. And, I published my PhD at the time, and, academic works are like that. No, they're not accessible. So nobody reads the stuff, right? So I've always wanted to publish a book that made it more accessible. And then I was I got on with my life. I got on with my career. I didn't have the time, but during particularly during lockdown, I started to do the writing, and I was also at that time I became a consultant, so I started my own business. So again, I had I was in control of my own diary again, so I was able to sort of find the time. And so the book is about some of those ideas around what it really means to have feminine power. And I describe feminine power as collective power. So it's the way in which we use our understanding of the relationships around us to then create impact through being powerful. And so because you can see power in a way that focuses on the power you have over other people, but what I wanted to do was make people aware there's another way of seeing power. You can also, define power as the way in which you work with others to create impact. So power with others rather than power over others. And so the book is about that. But it also, I think, really raises some of those issues that women confront because of the devaluing of femininity and the, overvaluing of masculinity, particularly at work, but just also in society. So I started to interview some women for the book. And I wasn't going to make it an anthology. I wasn't really going to include women's stories. I was just going to write it from, my perspective. But when I started to hear their stories, they were so amazing. They were so impactful to me that I thought I've got to put these words in the book. So what I've got in the book is I've got a bit of my story. I've got a bit of my philosophy around some of these issues, and I bring in some of the research, but hopefully in an accessible way. And then it's peppered with the words of these women. So you have, for example, women explaining their experiences of power, because the book starts with, where did we lose power? So a lot of the front end of the book is about losing power, and then it's about where stories about, where women started to maybe get an insight that you could do power differently. And then it's about regaining power, and then how do you keep that power? So you kind of go from the beginning of the book all the way through to the end. It's a bit of a journey. And in some ways, that's my journey too, because I feel like I started my career in that way where I perhaps lost some power in my career. I didn't understand what it meant to lead from a feminine perspective. What I was trying to do was emulate the other leaders around me.
Yes.
I was trying to be like, and I was getting feedback from them about all the things that were wrong with me, by the way, as a leader. But really what I realized then was that the leadership template was incorrect. I think I have very unique strengths as a woman, and as someone who wants to express strong femininity, I have very unique strengths that the organization needs, and it's about really valuing those. And so the book is really about, that kind of making a claim that those feminine characteristics are important. They're important for our future workforce too. And in the book, I mainly talk about women, but it's very relevant for what I call non-conforming men too, because there are a lot of men who opt out of organizational culture and leadership as well, because they don't want to work they don't want to lead in the way that the leadership template kind of forces us to lead in. They don't want to be devoid of emotions, or you often don't find emotional men in leadership positions, for example.
100%.
Right?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I literally was talking about that recently. It's something that they sort of conceal or hide or don't want to show.
Or otherwise they're considered weak, right?
100%.
So yeah.
100%.
So it's that.
And is there a sort of a specific story or a part of a story that, really resonated the most with, the people that you interviewed during the research for the book?
There's so many stories in there that I really loved. I think one of the stories I particularly liked was, so I'll tell you a story. This is some of the women wanted me to use a pseudonym. So this particular person wanted me to use and again, it's a bit sad, isn't it, that we can't tell a story, but she's a CEO, and she and I can understand that maybe it's a bit too early for her to tell this story. Maybe later in life she'll tell it, but she was willing to share the story anyway. So I'll call her Pauline. It's not her real name. Okay. So she was in an organization where she was a national manager. So she was on the executive team of this organization. She was the only woman. She was and in a male-dominated environment, but she was killing it. She was getting promoted. She's very smart. All her career, she was, on an upward trajectory. So she was respected by her peers. It was all going well. There was a Christmas party, and there was an incident of sexual harassment at the Christmas party where I think it was the CEO at the time or the 2IC, I can't remember which one, approached a younger employee and was really hitting on this younger employee. It was sexual harassment in a very blatant way. This isn't in the 80s, by the way. This is not that long ago. And what happened was other people saw what had happened because this woman was quite upset, and other executives formed a circle around this woman to try to dilute the situation and tell her that what she experienced wasn't really that bad. So then, and the Pauline saw this as well. This woman came to Pauline later, the week later, to tell her what had happened. Pauline said, "You have to report this to HR." The woman didn't want to. And Pauline said, "Well, look, I'll take this up." Right. So then Pauline goes to the executive team, and, these are her respected peers. And she starts talking about, the fact that this happened. We have to do something. We at least should have an investigation. And it kind of blew up because she unearthed it. And then there was an investigation, and but it got to a point where it was a kind of it was quite a toxic response to all of this, to the point where in the end the executive team started to say to Pauline, "Look at the situation you've put us in. How could you do this to us?" So total gaslighting, right?
Wow.
How could you put us in this situation? So in the end, she left this organization because she was no longer able to stay as part of this executive team. 5, maybe 6 years go by. She's now in another organization. And to her chagrin, she hears that the new, one of the new executives coming into the organization is one of these old boys that had been part of this incident. So she was really dreading it. And she saw this guy in the tea room, and he came up to her and he apologized to her. He said, "Pauline, I am so sorry about what happened to you and what happened to that woman. We were totally wrong." And Pauline was shocked at that total 360. And what had happened to this man was that in the corresponding period, he'd had some really hard knocks in the personal space. I think he had lost a daughter. There was a death in the family. He was suffering from grief, which brought up his emotional compass a little bit. And so through that own sort of self-compassion, he had more compassion, and he could see what had happened from that lens. And so to me, that's such a redemption story, because and how strong Pauline had to be to really face up to these people. So let alone, and this is why we say, why don't people report sexual harassment? How can you, when even a trusted executive ends up having that particular experience? And so, but in the end, it was a bit of a redemption story for her. And now, of course, she's CEO of an organization, and she's doing very well. And she is a very emotional leader. She expresses very strong femininity in her leadership. So I thought that was a lovely story. It's in the book. I've told it in her words in the book, and it's sort of told over a feat pages, but that's the shortened version.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, obviously, thank you for Pauline for sharing the story with you. And it's quite atrocious to kind of see that still happens. And like you said so recently, not very dissimilar to other circumstances that I've unfortunately seen or
yes.
But I think women like Pauline in this instance standing up for other women really will help shape things and change things. And obviously that ended up changing that fella's mind in the end. He maybe had consumed with guilt over those years as well. So it's great to see women leaders stepping up to support each other, and even sometimes where men step up to support as well, and actually not right. And we see
absolutely.
That
exactly.
Wow.
And I think that's the thing. It's only through conversation and dialogue, and women have to support other women as well. men can be allies to the cause as well. And not just gender, we're talking about diversity here in all its shapes and sizes. But you know what? We're not going to get it right. So what we've got to do is kind of do it with compassion, because we're not going to always get things right. So it's about, again, having a safety of saying, look, I really stuffed up there. I shouldn't have acted that way. And it's not labeling someone because of that. It's actually saying, yeah, that wasn't quite, that wasn't on. Have I got time to tell you another quick story?
Yeah, sure.
Have I got time? Yeah. This exemplifies what I'm talking about. So Gwen works for an organization. She's based in Hong Kong, and she was, she tells the story in the book too. She was in a meeting with a more senior manager who was a woman, another senior manager who was a man, and the head of that division, right? So the head guy. And the male senior manager was expressing some frustration with a customer that he was having, and didn't really want to do something. And the head of the division said, "Oh, come on, just grow some balls," And so everyone, so Gwen had a reaction to that. But at this time she was quite junior, and she wasn't quick enough because sometimes you have a reaction, you go, should I laugh? Is that really funny? But what happened was the senior manager, who's a woman, was much quicker, more experienced, more confident. And she turned around to the head guy and said, "That is not on." Mm-hmm. And the head of division said, "What? What did I say?" Like, what? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Anyway, he walked out. No one was going to change his mind. He didn't think he had said anything wrong. But the male manager who stayed in the room turned to the two women and said, "What is not right about that?" Because we say that a lot. We use those words a lot amongst us guys. What is it about that you find offensive? So what he did was open up the dialogue.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
How wonderful. That's because we're not always going to get it right.
100%. And we don't always know the answer. So you're better off asking the question and trying to understand what is wrong about certain situations. I think that's really a really positive step from that manager. So
yeah, exactly. And so, because I think at the moment there's a lot of heated discussion around gender, and because we're so worried about getting things wrong or perhaps not saying the right thing, and that 100%. Just stops dialogue.
100%.
We need dialogue for learning,
Yeah.
and you need to be able to, your experience is your experience. No one can tell you it's right or wrong. And if we're all open and asking it, really, really wanting to understand each other's experience, that's a great place to start.
Absolutely. Take away that fear that we talked about before as well.
Exactly.
Amazing. Well, we're almost at the end of our time together today. I'm sure we could have spoken about this for a lot longer. Just to close out today, question, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, a call to action, a piece of advice, or a question to ponder today?
Okay. You know what? I would like, perhaps a call to action is, what's a really lovely open dialogue that you could start in your workplace? Maybe there's an issue going on. Just how would you, maybe you need some help with that in terms of asking the question, but what's an issue you'd really love to just put on the table? And, how could you do that? And there's lots of help around. I'm happy to help. I'm sure you're happy to help, Fatima. But this is the thing, think about those issues. Let's not put up with that. Life and work should be joyous. We're all here for a purpose. So let's, how can we start to bring people together to do that? To kind of open that dialogue up. That would be my call to action, thinking about those things.
Love it. Sounds like a really good team exercise, maybe as we leave this busy period. No, that's been really, really wonderful. Thank you, Josephine. We'll definitely share the book and in the show notes so people can access it. Congratulations on it. It's obviously doing really well. So I'm looking forward to reading it myself. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a really great rest of the week.
Thank you, Fatima. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please share this with someone or rate it if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and to stay up to date with all things Agile Ideas, go to our website www.agilemanagementoffice.com. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea.